it's time for our next fireside panel. So let's welcome Robin. Oh, wait. 1 second, no worries. Just so yeah, we make this well. So Robin, Jane, and Linus to say, woo!
Hello, hello. Yeah, I'm going to grab one of these. And we have a very, very interesting panel for you guys. But as with all panels, we're going to start with a round of introductions. And if you don't mind, I'll start, because I assume that not everyone knows who I am.
Go for it.
So my name is Robin. I'm Belgian. I'm a European tech journalist. I used to work for TechCrunch for a long time. I don't know if Nabil is still in the room, but I actually voted for Quickie to win the TechCrunch Disrupt Award back in San Francisco in 2010. So you can thank me later if you're still in the room. So I used to be at TechCrunch and then moved to the Next Web. And now have my own company called Tech.eu. So what I basically do is cover the European startup and innovation ecosystem. I travel around, kind of see how these ecosystems are developing, meet with a lot of entrepreneurs and investors. So by all means, if you're one of them, find me after this panel and please have a chat with me. And Jane, who are you?
All right, I can actually use one of these. I'm Jane Dwallerud. I am a very early stage investor, and I've done this for quite some time now. So I'm up at, I think, at 19 or 20 total startups, of which some were when I was a kid, and so probably 15 since the turn of the century. And my return on investment is something between 60 and 80% a year since 2002. And we go in, I'm now working with my family. We're all entrepreneurs, and we go in very, very early, and we work operatively, part-time, and take ideas into companies. Operative work, yeah. And what we're good at, deep tech. We're really techy.
Great. Linus?
Sure. Well, I'm a venture capitalist, and I've been doing that for about 6 years now. First in Stockholm, and then I moved over to London to do it over there for a fund called Wellington. Ended up going operational after that to move to Copenhagen to be the first sort of external guy in the management team. That was a roller coaster, did everything but coding in that company, as you do in startups. And then in May, I just relocated back to Stockholm to set up InVentures sort of operations out of Stockholm, or sort of open up our Swedish office. So InVentures is a Finnish fund, sort of focused on Nordics and Baltics primarily. And then, yeah, so hiring a few people, getting stuff going here in Sweden as well for them.
Great. Well, what I like about this is that you both have started your own companies, or you have operational experience in startups. So you're not just from the investment side, you're not career investors per se. But imagine that I've never been to the Nordics or Sweden, and I know nothing about this scene. But I want to know, what's it like? What would be your answer to like a layman who doesn't know anything?
Well, there's obviously a few places you would just kind of start off with, sort of to get a feel for it. I think there's a couple of conferences like similar to this one that you would probably want to go to. Stockholm Tech Fest is another one, and then go to like Stockholm Tech Meetup and stuff like that. So get a sort of a feel for what's going on, and then you also get like sort of a, you hear about all the headlines about the companies, that sort of a quick sort of news updates. You hear a lot about that, and you start to meet sort of the first people that will help you sort of reach out to the entire sort of community.
And I would say that if you actually want to join a startup, a lot of the incubators have recruitment people who help to recruit into startups. So I know Sting has one. It's they have join a startup meetups. So if you want to do that, that's certainly possible. I'm sure they have that at Uppsala Innovation Center as well. And I would start at the incubators. I would start at one of the, since I don't really like the huge thousands of people and blaring music kind of person. I like talking to one person for quite some time. So I'd go to the smaller stuff. And if you're more like me, where you actually want to meet somebody for a longer time and not just shake hands with 50, then try SUP 46's meetups, or maybe this seems to be about the right size in order to actually meet people in depth.
And I think you could also there's usually in every city, it doesn't matter whether it's Uppsala, it's Stockholm, or wherever it is, there's a couple of people that are sort of the key people that you just need to find. And once you do that, they'll introduce you to everyone.
I call these the connectors. And
Yes,
you're right.
no, definitely,
Chinese
definitely. They know everyone, and like, doesn't matter if you want to find a company to work for, company to invest in, or just meet like amazing, brilliant people. They'll find them. They'll know them.
So
Listen-
Thomas Bennick,
Yeah, exactly.
that's the one. His name's Thomas Bennick.
So the topic is early stage investing in the Nordics. Of course, the Nordics, like Silicon Valley, is not one place, and early stage investing can take lots of forms and shapes as well. So it's a pretty broad topic if you think about it that way. But imagine that I'm an investor from the US or China, whatever, and I say, like, I'm interested in the Nordics now because I keep hearing about this. Why should I start with Sweden?
We're a lot bigger than the other parts of the Nordics in terms of startups. And there's a thriving ecosystem of investors that you can piggyback with or work with. So there, it's probably a decent idea to start in Stockholm. That said, Helsinki is coming up fast.
Oh, totally.
And that also said, sometimes the competition is pretty fierce in Stockholm now for the deals. So it's it's possible that you could want to be in Uppsala or Gothenburg or Umeå or something in order to find deals that you're not one of 50 on, right?
Well, I see you agreeing, so you agree. But what about Copenhagen? Because you used to live there.
Yep,
From an investment perspective,
Sure.
why not there?
So I think the whole sort of Copenhagen scene is actually starting to pick up quite decently right now. I think they've definitely been sort of behind the curve, if you will, for a long period of time. But they've started to have similar sort of breakout successes that Sweden has had for a long time. They've started to have the first sort of role models that sort of paving the way. So the first kind of exits, and then the companies, the founders of those companies are starting to build the second generation companies. They're starting to do angel investments into that as well. Something that's already happened in Helsinki as well with sort of the Supercell founders, etc., and Rovio and so on.
Yeah.
So I think we're starting to see that in Copenhagen as well. For me, if it's Stockholm or if it's Copenhagen, it's more like, what's your forte? What do you prefer? Like, do you prefer sort of deep tech hardware, stuff like that? Or do you want to go for more like marketplaces? Or so it's kind of more opportunistic, I would say.
And Estonia is doing quite well. They have the money and the people from Skype, right? And they've done a few really good ones. So Tallinn, Estonia is actually heating up.
Absolutely. I would automatically say to an investor, don't just look at the Nordics, include the Baltics. It's small region,
totally.
but very, very potential. But then early stage investment, especially in those more developed ecosystems, almost mature, you can call them. What happens typically is that the early stage investment tends to be relatively saturated to a point where you have options, right? You have angel investors, you have accelerators and incubators, you have state funding to various forms and shapes. And then you have early stage venture firms, and not just the local ones, but once a ecosystem matures, they're coming from other places as well. And then you have the international investors and the PE funds for the later stage. So my feeling is that at some point, if you're an entrepreneur in early stage and you can't find any funding at that stage, you must be doing something wrong. It's not a question of there's not enough capital. Do you agree?
Nah, not really, no. I'm afraid I'm a part of the Swedish Government Innovations Council, and it is actually a problem. There are areas that are very hot, software. There are areas that are a lot less hot, like new materials. Atoms, doing stuff with atoms is really pretty difficult. MedTech, there are fewer angel investors because it takes too long. Medicine, there certainly if you're doing, you have already got an AI that's working for something, for a problem that hurts. If you can't find money, then you probably have body odor, okay? But, but the other stuff, it's not necessarily easy, no.
I would say that on average, on the companies that we see, I agree with you. But then there are verticals, there are areas that it's really tricky, especially sort of when it comes to these sort of really hardcore technologies like material science, etc. Like the lead times are just insane, and there's a lot of investors that doesn't really want to get into that. They're more excited about the marketplace for renting out dogs, because they can like conceptualize, they can get it in their heads and so on. But like, I mean, there's never been a better time to be an entrepreneur. On average, I would say in Sweden or in the Nordics right now, like the abundance of capital, if you're doing something in software, or you claim to do something in AI, because most people claim they do, they don't. It's a good time to be an entrepreneur if you're doing something on the software side, I would argue.
A slightly different question, because you're both based in Stockholm, and this is my first time in Uppsala. Is Uppsala on your radar? Like, are the companies?
So I used to live here actually back in the days between when I was 15 to 20. So Uppsala, we also have a company that we invested here that we invested back in, must have been like 2009 or something like that. So we've done stuff here, but I mean obviously it's a smaller city. It has pros and cons. I actually think that right now it's actually an advantage not to be in Stockholm as well, due to the fact that you have a lot more talent. But then obviously it can also be a little bit too comfy on the work-life balance in smaller cities.
I've heard that before.
Yep.
Interestingly. Jane, any thoughts on that?
Well, we have now 2 Stockholm companies and 2, Gothenburg and Varberg. So I've got that, and I'm here now, right? And I have been in Uppsala a few times. I haven't found anything for us here yet. Uppsala's easy because for me to come here is a matter of a 40-minute drive. It's not a problem. It's easier than going to Gothenburg. It's faster, and if I'm going to be one of us is actually going to be in the company a week, a month, well, we can commute here. That's not a problem. So in that way, it's quite attractive. The negative for me with Uppsala is it's a lot of medtech, which is wonderful, and it's a great strength, but I'm not interested in medtech.
I think there's also something about the maturity of the ecosystem here, to be honest, where a lot of the companies we see that have sort of raised capital from Uppsala angels might not be the perfect setup. And what I mean by that is that sometimes sort of in Stockholm there's and in more international cities, you have these sort of angels who've been doing it for a long period of time. So they kind of know the rules about this is how much stake you take at that stage, and then when you go for a proper sort of seed round, then that's sort of the dilution, etc. So that thing I've seen in the last couple of years, like it's getting better, but it's definitely been a little bit on the greedy end of things, coming from smaller cities. That's just not an Uppsala case, but it's more like a smaller city, sort of the lack of maturity in the ecosystem.
Yeah, it's a lack of understanding how you make a real success as a business angel. You take too much too early, and then the whole thing dies. Yeah.
I think once you do this sort of full time, you always think about, okay, so here's where the company is now. Here's where we need to go. So you start like building these sort of scenarios about where it needs to hit. What if it doesn't hit that? You know, within sort of 18 months, we might have to do a bridge round. We might have to do like a convertible into the next round and stuff like that. And so if someone gives away too much equity early, that makes it really hard to raise an A round. So that thing is still, it needs a little bit of work, possibly.
Very interesting. We have a lot of students and first-time founders in the room, so I'm going to talk a little bit about how entrepreneurs can find you and should approach you. But before that, how do you find entrepreneurs? Like, what's your deal flow strategy?
So I think, again, similar to how I would work if I was sort of an international investor, well, I kind of work for an international fund, but still, is that there's usually a bunch of people, angels, entrepreneurs, certain incubators, certain like places where you go and try to hunt them down. So we try to do it in specific areas. So we're quite proactive on certain sort of areas that we do either more horizontally or sort of more vertically. So then you always try to find the experts, the most knowledgeable people there, or you do it through entrepreneurs that have a vast sort of experience, like a network, that kind of thing I would do on average.
Yeah, and I'm afraid I've been doing this for 15 years, so that entrepreneurs tend to find me or us. There is an area where our daughter Caroline is interested in sustainability, and that is something that is not my normal set of contacts. So she spent quite a bit of time getting into that community to understand what there is and who's the expert, and getting to know people just as you suggest. But no, for me, software, a lot of people know who I am. Easy.
But in terms of deal flow, is it getting more competitive in Stockholm? And
oh,
is that
yeah.
a good thing?
No, definitely.
Oh, it's wonderful. For about, 2003, 2004, I think I was probably one of 3 people or something that were actually investing in Stockholm. It was just, the ventures funds were dead. There were a few of us who'd made some money at the turn of but I was alone, basically. And now there are thousands of competitors, and it's wonderful. Because there's something called startupdocs.sc that Eric Brunet has put up, which is the right contracts, just there for free, and they're fair and they're clean, right? There's a lot of stuff that there's a community of paying it forward, and there's people who also invest, and it's turning into the way it should be.
Coming back to that, I just want to stress one thing that Jane said. If you're raising money, look at startup docs. If someone comes with other kind of terms than that, don't even consider it.
Yeah.
Good point. In terms of deal flow, if you flip it around, like if you're in this room, is it a good idea to approach you cold and say, listen, I have this startup, let's talk? Does that ever work? Or like cold emails for that matter?
So I'm not a fan of like regular pitches, you know, the ones where people come up and like, hey, can I pitch you? Let's have a conversation. Let's actually try to bring it down to a human kind of level, because we're two humans communicating. And so I find that's a better way. And what usually happens at conferences is that you have a line of 20 or 30 or 40 people who want to pitch you. At some point, like that becomes just a fucking mess. Sorry for the language. Like you can't separate one from the other, basically. So I'd rather have conversations with interesting people. And as soon as you find like interesting conversations, then you get more curious about what they do as well. And then if there's something, like be super quick, and then it's more about like, yeah, you can find me, just email me on, here's my email, stuff like that.
And for me, yeah, sometimes it's through friends, and sometimes it's absolutely a cold call, a cold email. Since I'm not a company, well, we have 3 of us, so we tend to say no as fast as we can. If it's just a little bit too late stage or it's the wrong area, we'll tell you, this is not for us, talk to that person instead.
No.
As fast as we possibly can. You'll find that the people, you really need to learn what a no is. Now, I'm very clear about our no's. This is not for me, okay, or this is not for us. We don't do that, you've gotten too far. But most VCs will not do that. They'll say, oh, fantastic idea, get back to me when you've done X. Or wonderful, but we're gone for 3 months doing something else. This anything but wonderful. I need to talk to you. There's an investment committee meeting on X date, so I need you to help me pitch you to my investment committee. Anything less than that is no. Please understand that anything, because I've seen a lot of really tragic cases of people who've been living badly, getting into debt because they think they have yeses or interested VCs and they actually don't. That's, please, anything less than my investment committee in 3 weeks, or please meet me on Tuesday, it's no.
Well, in fairness, there's also a responsibility for entrepreneurs, I think, to research the investment firms that they're talking to or going to talk to, so they don't waste time from either side, really. Because, you know, if you're pitching an investor that doesn't invest in the stage that you're at, or not in the vertical that you're at, then you're wasting your time. You're also wasting his or hers, right?
Yeah.
So
It's kind of like, obviously, we're trying to figure out if it's a good fit for us. It should be exactly the other way around as well. Like, when we invest in someone, it's for a long period of time. So obviously, we want that to be a partnership. And when I'm doing my research on a space or a human being, someone like the founders who are running a business, obviously, I want them to do the same on me. Like, I want them to call companies I've worked with, boards I've been on, whatever it might be, to figure out, who am I? Like, how do I work if shit goes down? What do I do if things go well? Like, what is it like? So definitely, I fully agree.
So a startup has piqued your attention somehow. It was introduced to you. You met them at a conference, and they come in for the first meeting in your office. What do you need to hear in the first 2 minutes to keep your interest high?
That's a good question.
Okay, then look, since I or one of us takes a part-time job with you guys for free, but we take a part-time, the first thing is personal chemistry. I want to feel like, hey, I'd like to work with this person.
Yeah.
This feels comfortable. This is good, or this is really interesting. But I want the level of, I like this person. Okay, that's the first thing. And then it's nice if they have, for me, barriers to entry. Okay?
Yeah.
Because I want to be able to build a company over quite a bit of time. I don't want to be immediately into, we're in a race against 50 others now. I want to have patents or some software that's developed that's hard to develop, or some, if you're doing AI, labeled data that nobody else has, including not Google and not Facebook, something that means it's hard to copy, which means you have time to build a company together. And then it has to be a real customer need. Okay, where I can really say, oh yeah, I completely agree. There was one of the companies up here who pitched. Wow, that is a need. That's a need I have too, and that's a need that I've seen in many ways. Okay, well that's interesting. Yeah.
I love that answer, because the problem with that question is a lot of investors say, well, they need to be like kick-ass people with a great idea in a big market. Well, duh. Like, that's what every investor. That's not a.
I think in the first 2 minutes, the only thing, if I were to stick it to just the 2 minutes, I would say passion. As sort of the main sort of driver, because you can see a lot of people are building something just because they found a little tiny hole in a market and realize no one is doing X for Y, but like the market is actually tiny. So I think that kind of passion on why you built something, you want that to sort of come across. The sort of willingness to almost like borderline obsession sometimes. You know, that kind of thing. You kind of want to see that spark in the eye when they talk about it in the first 2 minutes.
It's interesting that you say that, because obviously the topic is here in the Nordics. And whenever I do a lot of these startup competition where I'm a judge and whatnot, whenever the Nordic and Baltic entrepreneurs, they tend to be very reserved. Even if they are passionate about the product, they don't always communicate that. Have you encountered like
Of course. I mean, like I said, I used to live in London and heard a lot of other people pitch, right? It's definitely, and there's also like a massive difference on where you are in the Nordics. Like, try to get a Finnish guy to do a good sales pitch. I mean, I met one, and he was an ex-Rocket guy. I mean, no shit, Sherlock, right? I think, but then if you come to Copenhagen, they're hustlers. You know, like when you think you have a deal, you actually don't have a deal. So it depends on where you are as well. Estonians, Finns are kind of similar. Swedes kind of reserved. Norwegians the same, but like friendly. Danes, hustlers.
That's quite a wrap up there.
Although there's another thing that so I'm an immigrant, but I am comfortable in Sweden, right? And so I like the Swedish culture. And the Swedish culture is, for instance, my daughter was in San Francisco and listened to a company that was doing fake leather. Okay? And they said, we've got a contract with Louis Vuitton. We're going to be huge. We're going to change the whole thing. There will be no luxury products with real leather ever again, right? And then she said, and how much leather are you producing at the moment? Oh, we can't produce any yet. We have to get some scientists involved. Okay, and then she came home, and I'd met a couple of researchers at KTH doing something with wood, turning into nano something or other, right? And so the question was then, okay, so who does this? Well, you know, we think we can sell it to the cosmetic industry because it makes your wrinkles invisible. Wrinkles invisible is good, let me tell you. As a middle-aged one, wrinkles invisible is extremely good stuff. Really? Yeah, we've got some. We haven't actually delivered much to them yet. Oh, you've delivered to them already. How much are you actually making? Oh, well, this week we've had a little problem. It's only 10 grams a day, but sometimes it's 20. And by the end of the month, we're thinking we're going to be up at 500. And I talked to them again a little while ago. They're up at 5 kilos a day. Okay, these people, and there they were saying, well, you know, we're not really very far. We've only got one. And I'm going. But if they're American, they would say, we have something that you put it into makeup and people's wrinkles disappear. Okay? We are now producing 5 kilos a day, and we're selling to these. I mean, that would be a wonderful pitch. But instead, they're like, oh, well, you know.
You're absolutely right. And from a journalist perspective, I see the same. Like, I used to work in the Valley for TechCrunch, and you know, people would just be enthusiastic even if they didn't have a product or even a customer yet. Yeah. And here I think the pendulum swings a little bit far the other way, where they spend 3 years building a kick-ass product, and then they go, oh shit, now we have to sell this. How do we do this?
Yeah.
Well, now it's pitches on stage, like what do we say about our product? And you know, there's a little bit of a gap there sometimes, I think, in Europe.
Yes.
But anyway.
But it makes it easy for an investor because they say, oh, you can make wrinkles disappear. I like that, yes.
What should an entrepreneur ask you during the first meeting?
So I think obviously you want to try to figure out as much as possible on how we help out, on how we sort of add value. I mean, in the sort of the era of talking about if venture capital or sort of that kind of investment will disappear due to ICOs and stuff like that. I think it's a super valuable question on how you help companies, how you want to push them forward. I think that's something any entrepreneur should want to know. On how we help out. And I think the other part is actually trying to figure out, is this actually an investor who actually wants to invest? So, because a lot of them, it's in a VC's kind of interest to always know what's going on. Like so even like with some companies that I've worked with, we've sort of set up a strategy when you get inbounds because they're raising a B round, let's say, like they have to reach out. Like might not mean they're actually interested or even want to do anything on it. So instead, like flip it around, ask the investor, why are you interested in us? What's your take on our market? Why would you want to spend time with us, and how would you contribute to that? So get back to the VC again to make sure that they can prove how would they add value to that specific company.
That requires a lot of confidence on the part of the entrepreneur, where they feel they have several different opportunities for investment.
Of course.
Yeah.
It is also more of a B stage kind of thing, rather than a seed first angel round, like woo.
Or an entrepreneur who's been there before and has done this before.
Totally. No, but I still think that it matters on if you want to work with people, you want to know what they're going to do, right?
So what about co-investment? Like, what is the landscape here in Sweden? I actually don't really know. Like, is there any competition that you can feel, or is it mostly let's do this together?
Okay, starting out, you want money from most Swedes have no money, right? So you need to start off with money from the public sector. It comes for free. Okay, you start off with Almi. I hope you all know of Almi. Okay. And you get a loan, or you go to Vinnova if you're research heavy, and you get 2 to 5 million crowns. Okay, that will bring you to something where you still have all of your shares left, and you'll have something that is slightly investable, possibly. Then you probably usually want to go to somebody like me or one of my thousands of competitors, right, to get an angel investment. I will generally do an angel investment the first bit. Maybe we'll do it ourselves, or maybe we'll do it with Almi Invest, okay, because we think that Almi does a good job, okay, or we'll go with some old good friends that have the right competence for this, what we think is the right competence for that thing. Usually the first investment, almost always the money is not really enough to get to where you need to go. So there's usually a bridge. Unfortunately, there's usually a bridge. That is usually us, the current investors, and sometimes you need to bring in somebody new if the bridge is a bit bigger. And then when you get to the point where you are running at around $100,000 a month of revenue, then you're ready for an A round. $100,000 a month of revenue. Please understand that. That's a lot. It's recurring revenue. It's not something you sold once and then you hope to be doing. It's actually, you've got a running company there.
Yeah.
So that's not early stage anymore. Okay.
Yeah.
But getting there, you'll often need Vinnova, a loan from Almi, help from an incubator if you can possibly get it, soft money. Sometimes there's EU programs called Horizon 2020. You can get a fair amount of money out of there. One of my companies has been applying for that forever and never getting it, but we hope someday it'll come. And then after that, you get your investors in. Okay.
And last thing, if like there's no reason, if you don't need to take in money, don't take in money. Like there's too much talk about bringing in venture capital. Don't do it. We're horrible. No, but like we push you guys so much. If you want to be in control of your own destiny, then do that instead. Like trust me, you'll sleep better at night. So I think there's so much going on right now where everyone's talking about like, ooh, I raised this much money. Come on, that's like getting a ticket to a marathon. Wow, now you get to run for 4.2 kilometers, 42 kilometers more. Yay!
That's a good analogy. I'm going to steal that. But yeah, I tell entrepreneurs a lot, like, revenue tends to be the cheapest money.
Yeah,
so
totally.
focus on that first.
Totally.
Yeah, and also it's usually the truth that the companies that need venture capital, it's like putting a turbo engine or 3 of them onto a little company. You have to be ready for that, and your market opportunity has to be short enough that you really need the turbo to get there fast enough. The vast majority of companies don't need that. I mean, 95% really don't need it.
Easy.
More than that. Yeah.
99.9.
Yeah.
So I see that you guys don't see this, but I see the monitor like blinking over time. I'm going to completely ignore this and ask the audience if you have any questions. I have a mic, so you come run to me. I'll give it to you. Does anyone have any questions for this lovely panel here? So Swedish. I'm sure you do. Just raise your hand. There you go.
Yeah.
Come up here.
Okay, I can stand it. Hi. My question is, how do you deal with a company that's been making good enough money but never really getting there? Not necessarily because the market is too small. Imagine a company that you talked about 100 grand a month in revenue. Now think of a company that makes 50 grand a month in revenue. It's been doing so since last 10 years. And you've got a competitor that's doing 50 million a year, but you just can't seem to get there. For that, what do we do? Do we raise capital? Do we reach out to venture capitalists? How do we go about trying to get to that 50 million a year mark?
Let me just take an example. I think that's probably best. There is a company that isn't mine, okay, and has never been mine, unfortunately. It's called Icomera. It's a Gothenburg company. It does Wi-Fi for buses and trains, okay? It had fantastic technology and grew really slowly, and it was around 40 people, and nothing really happened. And then the thing is that a lot of people on the buses and trains would like to have Wi-Fi, so there was a market there. And the investors finally switched out the CEO, who was a man even older than I am, and got in some new people, and it completely exploded, okay? And they sold it for, I don't know, $1 billion or so last year? Or maybe it was this spring? It was an amazing thing. What they did was they took the management team. The management team had shares, and they still had their shares. So they got to be part of the upside, right? But they put in more money, and they just said, look, we need to do sales. We needed a more commercial-driven CEO who's not really thinking about going home to his summer house, right? And going for it. And they've done really well. So that's one group of investors. I think it was only angel investors there that did very, very well.
Yeah, I think this, to the point, there is something about sometimes the people who started a business might not be the ones who are going to take it to become really big. Not everyone is Daniel Ek or Zuckerberg or whatever it is, right? So sometimes that sort of external people are needed to help out, and some people have done it before. So, because sometimes you get sort of stuck in your own kind of like routine and you sell the same way and so on. So sometimes that's needed, and maybe you need cash for that sometimes, but you need to prove a proper model for it. Otherwise, it's more of a private equity kind of deal where they basically set the strategy, and then together with the new management team, they together during the first 100 days set up what you together will do.
Great. Well, at this point, we're way over time, so I'm going to get kicked out of this lovely castle. So instead, I'm going to end this here. Linus, Jane, thank you so much for participating in this panel.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robin.
Thank you.